Hello and welcome to today's program, The Weight of Law School, Recognizing and Rebounding from Depression. This program is being brought to you by the American Bar Association's Law Student Division, Young Lawyers Division, Law Practice Division, and Section of Legal Education and Admissions to the Bar. I'm Alyssa Koenig. I am the Law Student Division's Delegate of Programming and a 3L at New England Law in Boston. Before we get started, I'd like to remind law students that ABA membership is free. The ABA has just introduced premium benefits, which includes a savings of $250 on Barbary Bar Review, $25 off West academic casebooks, and a legal ethics bundle that includes a free Model Rules of Professional Conduct ebook. Upgrade to premium for only $25. You can sign up today at abaforlawstudents.com/go premium. I would also like to encourage you to join Law Practice Management Division. As part of your ABA membership, law students may join up to 5 sections. Divisions and forums are free of charge. Membership in the Young Lawyers Division is free with your Law Student Division, or with the YLD is free with your Law Student Division membership, and it does not count against your 5 free sections. So let's go ahead and get started. Joining us today are the authors of The Full Weight of the Law, How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression. We have Dr. Jeff Fortgang and Dr. Shawn Healy. Dr. Fortgang is a graduate of Yale University and of Adelphi University's Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies. Licensed as both a psychologist and alcohol drug counselor, he has held positions and directed clinical programs at several Boston area hospitals and clinics, and served as an instructor in psychology in the Department of Psychiatry of Harvard Medical School. Since 1998, he has divided his time between private practice and Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, the Massachusetts Lawyer Assistance Program. Dr. Healy received his PhD in clinical psychology from Suffolk University in 2006, where he focused most of his research on conflict resolution. Dr. Healy has held positions as an adjunct faculty member at a variety of colleges in the greater Boston area, and for many years he worked and later came to direct community mental health clinics in the greater Boston area, serving children, adolescents, and adults with major mental illness. Since 2014, he's worked full-time at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, the Massachusetts Lawyer Assistance Program. Dr. Fortgang and Dr. Healy are the co-authors of the book, The Full Weight of the Law, How Legal Professionals Can Recognize and Rebound from Depression, published through the American Bar Association. So let's go ahead and get started. Dr. Fortgang and Dr. Healy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thanks everyone for joining us. So we're going to be talking about law school, the stresses of law school, sort of the things that contribute to both good and bad mental health in law school, some ways of recognizing and assessing, and also some things you can do to improve your mental health and your wellness. So let's begin where it all begins, in law school. So law school is a place that has unique stressors. It's usually something different than most people have experienced prior to law school. Rates of depression, substance use, anxiety, and stress are typically higher than usual. So one thing to keep in mind is that you're not alone. Most law students who experience a heightened level of depression or substance abuse or anxiety or stress can be tempted to think that it's them, it's something about them, they're not doing it right, and they can feel alone and isolated. So one, remember that you're not alone, and two, remember that there are practical ways to get help and to maintain well-being. Dr. Fortgang and I are psychologists, we're not rocket scientists, so the things that we're talking about are not rocket science. Our strong recommendation is to prioritize your mental health today and every day. It's not, we would say don't wait until the stress is over, don't wait to the end of the semester, don't wait to the end of the year or at the end of law school, but take time and energy to prioritize your mental health now. So starting now is important because your legal careers will require every skill that you develop today. Waiting until after law school won't improve your mental well-being, and then you're going to also lose time and practice in those skills when they're really needed. So some Startling statistics, if you're not familiar. Before law school, incoming law students look like the general population in terms of their rates of depression, which is between 7 and 8%. During law school, this changes quickly. After the first semester, rates of depression are around 27%. After the first year, they go up to 34%, and after the third year, it's around 40%. So there are a combination of factors that contribute to this. One is the adapting to the new challenges and culture of law school. There's often elements of law school that are unique. One is the use of the Socratic method. So being asked questions and then responding to those questions by then being asked more questions. Instead of getting to a concrete answer that you can feel secure and confident that you know what you're talking about, you're just met with more questioning, which just encourages uncertainty
and self-consciousness.
Right.
And you feel much more that you're in the spotlight than just digesting information.
Right. And also, it's often said that law school teaches you how to think differently. So that process really challenges a lot of internal core principles and values that you hold. Whether it's your sense of justice being challenged to then look at something in terms of the letter of the law, or other examples of changing the way that you would think about things. The imposter syndrome is also very common. It's not talked about much for reasons that will become evident in a moment. But the imposter syndrome is when an individual in a competitive environment starts to think that everyone else around them knows what they're doing or is more prepared than they are. They are aware of their own faults or shortcomings, but they're not aware of everyone else's. So by comparison, they feel like an imposter, like they don't belong, that perhaps they were admitted by mistake, and it's only a matter of time before people are going to find out that they're the imposter, that they don't belong. So a little bit of the imposter syndrome can actually be helpful. It can encourage people to strive to learn more, to feel more prepared. More of the imposter syndrome can be a barrier. It can make people feel alone. They can isolate. They can be less likely to ask questions for fear of that revealing that they don't know something that they should have known already. And it can contribute to feeling depressed and isolated. Also, the competitive environment of law school can contribute to these stressors. Oftentimes, the pressure to be at the top of the class is quite high in order to get a good job afterwards. So this competitive environment can lead people to not help each other, but in fact to isolate or to try to succeed apart from others.
Which also becomes an issue in one's legal career.
Correct. And also there's a reality of there are more lawyers and fewer jobs than there used to be. So lawyers are retiring later, therefore not opening positions, and law schools are still producing lawyers, therefore there's more competition for those positions.
So rather than give a list of symptoms and functioning problems, we thought it would be nice to talk about what healthy human functioning features, and then look at how the pressures of law school might get in the way. When any of these features of healthy human functioning are absent or impeded, it's helpful if you don't ignore that. With lawyers in general, we find people ignoring these things until they've advanced quite a bit. On the other hand, nobody's life is just right. Everyone has bad days. Everyone reacts to things. If someone broke up with you, or you just got a flat tire, you're going to have a reaction if something didn't go your way. But these are temporary and transient reactions. When the impediment is persistent or recurrent, so that you're spending more days than not with a low mood, or you're noticing problems in the way you relate to others that keep cropping up and form a pattern, those kinds of problems are worth addressing.
So we're going to go through different areas of functioning. First, physical functioning. Some major areas of your physical functioning involve eating, sleeping, and activity. So for eating, think to yourself, are you eating like you typically do versus eating too much or too little? And are you eating a reasonably good, nutritious diet? So you should pay attention to changes in your appetite and in the foods that you're eating. Sleeping is probably one of the most important areas of your well-being. So are you getting a good sleep routine? Do you have a good sleep pattern? Are you getting consistent sleep? Not too much, not too little. When you wake up, do you feel rested and refreshed? And also physical activity. Are you able to get up and going in the morning? Do you have periods of physical activity throughout your day? And with the high demands of law school, oftentimes it requires sort of sitting and reading a lot. So are there ways that you can become more physically active in spite of that?
And all of these things, when they're not present, constitute the more biological symptoms of depression.
Mm-hmm.
So now let's look at your emotional life. These are things we all like to have in our lives every day if we're functioning well. Most days we ought to have some fun or pleasure.
And puppies.
And puppies are essential. We ought to feel a general sense of hope and ability to look forward to aspects of the future. We don't need to be gleeful. We don't need to be looking forward to every aspect of the future, like student debt, for example. But generally, there's a feeling of looking forward if one is not depressed. Emotional life also involves some level of energy and motivation. Despite the fact that work can be challenging, that can also be something to get enthusiastic about. And so when people are depressed, there is often an absence of these. Those of you who are too young to know this is a picture of Basil Rathbone, who was the most famous Sherlock Holmes in the 40s. Mm-hmm. And there you see him concentrating like crazy, because the ability to concentrate is part of normal cognitive functioning, and to absorb information and complete tasks. Depression is not the only thing that can interfere with concentration, but it certainly is one. We also, in general, in normal emotional life, we want to feel okay about ourselves. So we don't have to think that we're the greatest ever. We don't have to adore everything about ourselves, but we ought to feel like we're pretty okay and we accept who we are. And it's also helpful to have a sense that what we're doing makes some difference, and so that there's some sense of purpose and meaning in how we're running our lives. In healthy emotional functioning, we're able to handle conflict both with others, such as you're involved in a joint project of some kind and you have strong differences with other people about how best to do it, or conflicts within yourself, like part of me feels this way and part of me feels that way. Here's something I really want, and yet it scares me. So everyone experiences those conflicts. If they are overwhelming, that can be an issue. And finally, in this area, there's the ability to handle unexpected hurdles, because certainly the nature of life is that unexpected obstacles come up, and we don't have to be happy about it, but we need to feel capable of coping with it. Now let's look at your interpersonal life. Fairly straightforward things. Human beings and other mammals function best when they feel connected to at least some other people, when they don't feel isolated or like they're an island unto themselves. If you're not feeling connected to anyone, that is an issue and likely connected with depression. We do best when we have daily interactions with others. And again, that entails not being isolated. And many of these interactions may not be gratifying, but some of them ought to be gratifying. Another thing that we find continually with lawyers is that they've been encouraged to play things close to the vest, and they have not been talking to anybody about the challenges in their lives and the things that make them lead them to feel good or bad or concerned or anxious or whatever. And that makes it, that's a key way that we cope with these kinds of feelings, is by talking to others.
So now, at this point in the presentation, if you've thought that every positive thing that was listed is true for you and you have no issues, congratulations. But also, that would mean you're not human. So there's always something that could improve in your life. So as you recognize certain things that you could improve on, what do you do about that? The first thing is to familiarize yourself with many options. The more options that are available to you that you're aware of, the more you're able to use those. But just knowing what the options are will reduce some stress. Whether or not you actually access those options is another thing, but being familiar with them is helpful. Also, don't try to solve every issue at once. As we went through these lists of things that are good about life and indications of depression, if there are multiple things that stuck out to you as things that could be improved, it can be overwhelming to think that you have to change everything, particularly if you don't know how. So our recommendation is to start with one thing. Don't try to change it all at once. Start small and work from there. Also, make connections with resources prior to needing them. Whether it's something formal or informal, the more that you have a connection with a resource, the more likely you are to use it when you need it. We talk to a lot of law students and lawyers on a continual basis, and one of the things that comes up a lot is that people wait until a crisis before they look for resources to help them. Those who are more proactive are those who are aware of their resources prior to that crisis point. So as we look at our lifestyles, what are some ways that we can intervene and make some changes in a positive way? Again, not rocket science, some simple things. First off, exercise. As I mentioned, with law school and the continual amount of work that's put on your plate, it's not unusual to see your amount of exercise decrease and the amount of sitting and studying and being sedentary increase. So try to increase your exercise, whether that's walking or standing, just being active in some way.
And this is not just that it seems like a good idea to us. There's lots of scientific validation for the idea that exercise helps mood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just getting up and going can increase your mood. Oops, let's not go too fast. Also, nutrition. So again, with a busy lifestyle, you're more likely to eat on the run, to not prepare food, to eat processed food, high sugar. So focusing on your nutrition and improving that, making it slightly more healthy, less sugar, less caffeine, will be a helpful change to your lifestyle. I mentioned sleep before. So sleep hygiene is just a clinical way of saying a good sleep routine. And this involves a predictable schedule of sleep, a predictable routine prior to sleep, so that you classically condition your brain to sleep when you lay down and intend to sleep. So most people have some struggle with sleep, particularly when they're in a high stress environment. So whether that's getting to sleep or staying asleep. So investing time and energy in improving your sleep will have ripple effects on your well-being. Poor sleep will affect your concentration, your memory, your mental processes, your emotional well-being, your physical well-being. So improving your sleep will have benefits across all of those domains. And also, learning healthy coping skills is going to aid you not just now, but in the future. So unhealthy coping skills are typically those coping skills that are more immediate in their effect. So whether it's going to happy hour and burning off some steam, drinking, or whether it's sort of distracting yourself or withdrawing from a stressor and getting involved in something else like playing video games for a long time just to get away from the stress. Those coping skills don't actually improve your experience of that stressful environment. But a healthy coping skill, even though it takes more energy, more time, more commitment, the healthy coping skill will actually improve your life, will increase your resilience, and will be an added benefit to your future so that you can handle future stress as well. So in addition to your lifestyle, reaching out for outside help is an essential part of being a well-rounded, healthy, and competent law student and professional in the future. Despite the messages of doing things on your own and being independent, none of us live in a vacuum, and no one who has made it through difficulty has done it on their own. So we encourage you to reach out for outside help, whether it be through your law student groups at your school, through the ABA, getting connected with the Dean of Students, or getting connected to the Lawyers Assistance programs in your area. So every state has one or more version of a Lawyers Assistance program, and most of them, if not all, also serve law students. So we highly encourage you to get connected with those resources. Again, even if you don't need them yet, but having a connection with them can make it much easier to use them in the future.
So I'm going to talk a little more about the getting an overview of the forms of outside help. So the one that we tend to think about the most, because it's what we do, is therapists. And there are the talk therapists are mostly psychologists, social workers, some nurses with special training, and there are still some psychiatrists who do talk therapy, but they have tremendous financial incentives to do prescribing more than talk therapy. I want to give a quick overview of the approaches to therapy because there are many of them. And even this is not a complete list, and I'm not going to go into each of these. But the old standbys, the two big orientations are cognitive behavior therapy has been the most prominent one for the last 20 or 30 years, and tends to emphasize the connection between how you feel and how you're thinking, including thinking in ways that are automatic that you may not realize you're doing. Psychodynamic, which has been around longer, is a form of therapy that is a descendant of Freud and psychoanalysis, but which emphasizes insight into how you function, what things mean to you, and how you relate to others. Couple or family therapy is another modality rather than individual, and is chosen if that captures better where the problem may lie. And in couple or family therapy, the patient is not any of the individuals, but it is the couple or the family. Some of these other modalities you can just look at for a moment, and you may recognize some of them. I have not listed any that I consider fringy or unworthy, but these are some newer approaches, and we have limited time. But if you have questions about that, you can ask them today, or you can email us down the road. I'm not advancing now.
Try again.
All right. Oh, so the other thing that we think is important is to realize that the term therapist or psychotherapist is not a regulated term. So any of you can put a shingle on your door tomorrow that says you're a therapist. So
we don't recommend that.
We don't recommend that. And what we do recommend is seeing only people who are licensed in one of the disciplines that I mentioned earlier. It's much more likely that you'll see somebody who knows what they're doing, although not a guarantee. So, and then groups are another form of help. Group therapy is a term that usually implies that there's a professional leader, therefore it usually costs something or may be covered by health insurance. Some groups are ongoing. Some of them are time limited. It's not unusual for a group to be 6, 8, or 12 sessions. Some groups are about a specific problem, such as an assertiveness group for people who have trouble asserting themselves. Some groups are general, just about sort of dealing with people and feelings. And then another dimension is that there are groups that are didactic, so that they're a lot like classes, and they emphasize acquiring information. There are groups that are primarily interactive, where the leader is a facilitator, but the interactions among the participants are the key therapeutic factor. And then there are support groups where people are brought together because they share the need to give and receive support. For example, a grief group. Then there are self-help groups, also called mutual support groups, which typically are led by peers. The best known of these are the 12-step groups. There are many of those. The first 12-step group, of course, was Alcoholics Anonymous, which began in 1935. Some other self-help groups, Smart Recovery is another group that focuses on abstinence from alcohol and drugs. The Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance is a nationwide self-help and mutual support organization for people dealing with significant depression and bipolar disorder. And Shawn pointed out when we were reviewing the slides earlier that there's a newer self-help group for addictions called Refuge Recovery that has a more Buddhist orientation. I don't know how widespread that is.
One of the common things that Jeff and I hear from law students and lawyers who call or come into our office is that they recognize a peer is suffering in some way and they don't know what to do. So we often recommend some simple steps. First is to express sincere concern to that person, to approach them and express your sincerity, and to state what you have observed, as opposed to trying to figure out what's behind it. Just simply state what you observed in terms of a change in their mood, if they used to laugh and now they don't, or they used to smile and now they don't, or you used to see them in class and you haven't seen them in a while. And then listen non-judgmentally. Give them an opportunity to talk to you, to express what they're thinking and feeling, and encourage them to get help. As we mentioned, the more that you are connected to resources even prior to needing them, the more likely you are to access them when you need them, and the more likely you are to help someone else access those resources. And you can also offer to help them get connected to those resources.
A thing that's important here is that quite often we are not the best observers of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So there's a very good chance that you'll notice that somebody else is getting depressed before they notice it.
Mm-hmm. Now, preparing for the future, one day law school will be over, and then you will be a lawyer. You'll pass the bar. You'll pay back your loans. Lots of good stuff to look forward to. But there's good news and bad news about the future. So some bad news, the culture of law school often persists after law school. The competition, the imposter syndrome, the stress. The good news is that rates of depression decrease after law school. The bad news is they don't decrease all that much. So somewhere between 21 and 28% is typically what lawyers report, which is 3 to 4 times higher than the general population. The good news is that treatment is slowly becoming sort of more normalized, less stigmatized, and more accessible. The bad news is that doing nothing is the least effective intervention. So again, my strong recommendation is not to wait. Don't wait until law school is over. Don't wait and tell yourself that it'll just go away. Do something now. The good news is that when people do access effective treatment, on average, it results in improvements ranging from 47 to 66%. So that's a significant change in the positive direction.
So as we begin to wrap up and look to the future, I think it's very helpful to try to remember to monitor how you're doing, and even to put a reminder in, like at the first of the month, to think about this. Are your thoughts of the type that is normal for you? How are your feelings doing? What are you feeling? How's your behavior? And how's your physical state? All the things we've been talking about, but observing yourself in this way regularly. And remembering that, yes, you're transforming yourself into being a lawyer, but ironically, you're still a human being, and to keep that in mind.
All right. Well, this concludes our formal presentation, and we'll move on to questions.
Thank you, Drs. Healy and Dr. Fortgang. We do have a few questions. One of the biggest things for law students that we really have gotten a couple questions about is mental health, how that treatment can affect your bar character and fitness. I think that's a big concern, and taking that initiative to seek help on how that's going to affect that bar application. Do you have any advice on that?
Definitely. Yeah, this is a very common concern. We get asked this a lot. This is probably one of the main reasons why many law students don't seek help, for fear of having to disclose that on a bar application, to have to talk about it in the character and fitness portion. For just fear that they'll be judged, negatively judged, for having a mental health concern. So a couple of thoughts. One, our strong recommendation is always to get the help you need when you need it. Again, don't wait. Don't wait until after you pass the bar so that you can avoid any chance of having to disclose to the board of bar examiners that you had mental health treatment. That's never a good idea, because problems only get worse as you don't address them. The other thing is most examiners are looking for competent lawyers who are going to represent the profession well and serve the public well. So having mental health or substance abuse issues in your past isn't a disqualifier. They want to know, have you recognized it? Have you got appropriate help for it? And are you resilient, or are you at a place where you can be a competent and professional lawyer?
I think that's important to emphasize. Of course, we have the most experience with Massachusetts, but we have not seen a case where getting treatment worked against anyone in getting admitted to the bar. We have seen cases where having a problem that was even if they didn't have any questions about that, that came out by way of behavioral indications, where if the person hadn't gotten help, that worked against them. And sometimes the Massachusetts Board of Bar Examiners has sent people to us for an assessment. We don't do an assessment of fitness, but we do an assessment of clinical status and treatment plans. And again, the interest has always been, is this person getting the appropriate kind of help?
Yeah. And it is also helpful to know what each state requires. So if you know that you're going to be applying for the bar in a certain state, take time to look that state up to see what's required in terms of reporting. Some states don't ask at all about mental health treatment. They only ask about behavior, so arrests or criminal behavior. Other states ask about mental health treatment. But even though they might ask about it and you might have to talk about it, that doesn't mean that that disqualifies you. In fact, that can be an indicator that you're more aware than most, that you take proactive steps, and that you're resilient. And we always tell people to use their story as an indication of resilience, not as a shameful part of their past, but to indicate that they are able to recognize what they need and get help for what they need.
And take responsibility.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great, thank you. With law school, it's such a competitive environment. We sometimes have this stigma of mental health issues that prevent students from speaking up or speaking to each other or speaking to somebody who maybe they can turn to for help. How do we get past this stigma and be more open about mental health issues?
Yeah, I think the power of example is a very powerful force. I recently sat in and participated in a local law school class where the professor began by talking a little bit about the psychological help that he had gotten during a stressful period in his life. And I think having people in positions of power and guidance conveying that this is a good thing to do and not emphasizing any stigma about it may make more difference than anything else, and conveying that there won't be any shame or judgment for dealing with the fact that somebody is an actual human being with the same vulnerabilities as anybody else.
And the more that people, as Dr. Fortgang was just saying, the more that people talk about their experiences in a confident way, in an open way, it goes against stigma. So the more that we hide what we're going through, the more that stigma can grow. So I would encourage people to talk about their experiences with one another, law student to law student, upperclassmen to lowerclassmen, so that it just becomes more of a normal conversation. And you don't have to talk about pathology. You don't have to diagnose anybody or yourself. You can just talk about your experience. What's hard, what's helpful, ways that you've overcome obstacles. And the more that you talk about that real human experience, the more likely others are to share what's going on for them and to use each other as resources. But the more that people isolate and feel like they can't talk about vulnerabilities, that just contributes to the isolation and increased depression.
Thank you. Well, we have a couple questions on immediate coping skills. What do we do as law students to pull ourselves out of that depressive mood so that we can stop putting off classwork or assignments, and some immediate things to deal with that stress that we can do on our own?
one thing, when somebody feels overwhelmed and immobilized, it can be particularly helpful to begin by saying, okay, what is this task before me? And to break it down into very small pieces. And so that the smallest piece of the task is something that you could almost do if you were in a coma. And then begin with that, and that can start to break the logjam of feeling unmotivated and paralyzed, and then you begin to build up some speed.
Mm-hmm. And also, it's helpful to tell yourself that you don't need to feel better in order to do the tasks in front of you. So sometimes it can feel like depression has to go away completely in order for me to feel like I can keep doing what I need to do. But sort of accept the fact that, yeah, you might feel depressed, but you can still do the things that you set out to do. Another technique might be to change your focus. So if it seems really hard to do your assignments or the work of your classes, and it feels like you can't do that, try to do something else. Try to do something that is less weighted by pressure. So whether that's getting up and just walking, going for a walk, getting active, doing another task just to get yourself moving. Once you are moving in some way, either mentally or physically, it can be easier to then take the next step. So either approaching it directly by breaking it down, or taking the side route and doing something different.
Great, that's great advice. Now, you mentioned the statistics that go up 1L year, 2L year, 3L year, that continue to increase with people who suffer from some type of mental illness or depression. How do you know if this is going to continue to follow you after law school, and what can you do about that?
Yeah, I think if you're experiencing depression in law school, based on the pressures of law school and the legal profession, then I think it's wise to plan for the future and set up supports now that will be helpful after law school. For some people, their depressive symptoms go away as their environments change, so there could be an improvement just by the fact that you're done with law school and you're not studying for the bar anymore, and maybe you have a job and you feel better about life in general, and you can actually talk to people again and see a movie and take a nap.
You know, the thing is that you're in a field in which it's more adversarial than what most other people do, and there's more of an emphasis on scanning information to find what's wrong than there are in other fields. Seligman has talked about that as one of the reasons that depression might be especially high among lawyers. So it's important not to get totally wrapped up in that worldview, and to, again, maintain your humanity and the same kinds of values that you had before you got into this profession, and to not lose touch with the things that are important to you, the things that are gratifying to you, and your close connections to other people. And all of those things will help to prevent you from sliding into a deep depression.
Thanks. All right, I'm just going to do one more question here. How can someone deal with just specific anxieties around test taking your law school exams, or even taking the bar, especially those who maybe historically haven't tested well? How can we combat that anxiety that you feel?
You have techniques for that?
Sure. So test anxiety is very common. Sometimes law students will come to us for referral to get assessed for their anxiety. We've had people try to get accommodations for their anxiety for testing. But there are some pretty effective techniques for treating anxiety. Sometimes it involves medication. Sometimes it involves exposure to the anxious stimulus. So if you're really anxious about taking tests, you can improve your experience with that by taking more tests, basically exposing yourself to that, the stimulus that is making you anxious.
And then from a cognitive behavioral standpoint, you would examine what you're saying to yourself about what the test means. And you would, so first you want to become aware of that, and then you want to practice changing it. So if you're going into a test and saying, this is going to be the occasion that assesses my worth, or this is where they're going to find out whether I really deserve to be here, this is what's going to make or break me, then that, of course, is going to contribute to lots of anxiety and potential paralysis. So the idea would be to find more realistic and healthier and more self-embracing things to be saying to yourself as you go into that situation. So that there would be the conditioning part, which would be exposure, so that the more you do it, the less anxiety it elicits. And then this would be the cognitive part.
Mm-hmm. And to illustrate that, a lot of students have the experience of when they take a practice test, in their mind, it doesn't mean anything. It's just practice. And so they're more relaxed and they do well. And then when they take a test and they're thinking that, oh, this means something more, it's my time to prove myself, then the pressure increases, their anxiety increases, and that affects their performance. So as Dr. Fortgang was saying, sort of recognizing those thoughts and trying to challenge those thoughts can go a long way to treat the anxiety. In addition to that, also working on just accepting the fact that taking tests are anxiety provoking. So accepting the fact that you will feel some level of anxiety, most people do, and you can still succeed even though you feel that anxiety, as opposed to thinking in a very concrete way that I must feel calm in order to succeed, or if I feel anxiety, that's a warning sign that I'm going to fail. That's not necessarily true as well.
Thank you. That is all the time that we have for questions today. Thank you again, Dr. Fortgang and Dr. Healy, for your time. I just want to remind the attendees, if you came in late or you know someone who may be interested in this topic or will benefit, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available in a link sent to the attendees, so you can look out for that. Thank you for joining us today. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.